economy was one of the I believe 60% of voters are worried about the economy. And so that's a big issue. And there's some differences between both candidates in how they're thinking of the economy. So why don't we start with James? James, what are your thoughts of the current economy?
Oh, I'm very troubled by the national debt. It doesn't rank as high as I like it to be. I think it's the #1 issue as far as I'm concerned. It's now $35 trillion with a T. We're spending over $2 billion a day just on interest. This is unsustainable. So I'm very disappointed in actually both candidates. I haven't heard any one of them.
Just to clarify, you're talking about both the Republican and Democrat parties are responsible for this.
Absolutely. I blame both parties. There's plenty of blame to go around. I was originally supporting Chris Christie for the Republican nomination. I now support Donald Trump. I think he's probably the much better candidate. He's certainly not perfect. But that said, I must say I'm disappointed. I think both Trump and Harris are trying to outdo each other with tax cuts and all sorts of goodies. And that's how we got into this mess. So I'm a little disappointed with both of them.
Sarah, what do you say? A lot of voters today are concerned with, the cost of groceries have gone higher, cost of housing, gas prices. This is a big issue for voters in 2024. What are your thoughts?
So I tend to be of the same mind in the sense that, this is never, year over year, term over term, budget deficits and or spending deficits and all of these sort of big picture debt problems at the U.S. Problems or circumstances, depending on how you define it. It's a multi-party problem, right? It's everybody in the political system is responsible in their ways for the state of affairs. I think that it's so complicated and so complex to discuss these issues that regular voters really are feeling what they feel, and to message that you're going to have a particular policy that's going to address inflation, or that's going to address the debt, or that's going to address affordable health care or affordable housing or whatever it might be, those types of policies are hard for people to understand just as a general concept, like in conversation, I think, because they're complex and they're very nuanced and they're kind of wonky. But again, like I understand, and I think for me personally, and I think for the people that I know, we obviously care a lot about how much we're spending, and it feels very much like things are not as great as they actually kind of are if you look at other measures of the economy, so like the stock market and that kind of thing. And I think people are right to point out that using the stock market, for example, as a way to sort of determine the health of the country is not actually that fair, because who are stockholders, right? I mean, not everybody is benefiting from that. So, I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't have policy proposals, but I think that people are right to care about those issues, those sort of what they call pocketbook issues. And it's a big problem that both sides, both parties need to address.
Harris is saying that she wants to basically give $25,000 to new home buyers. She wants to reinstate tax credit for people with kids. And also she wants to kind of, go after grocery stores or capitalism and, because of price gouging of some form. What do you think of her policies in trying to address and also give tax breaks, I believe, to those that make $94,000 or less, which, are considered, middle class at that?
I think it's a general matter. The child tax credit and expanding the child tax credit, for example, is a great way to put money in the hands of families, which I think everybody, whether or not you agree that the tax credit is the most appropriate way to do it, everybody agrees in principle, I think, that families are the people who need help the most in a challenging economy, or in any economy, whether it's challenging or not. And by the way, that money goes back into the economy, so it's this sort of false idea that like you give people money and they're just gonna set it on fire. No, it's gonna actually go back into the economy to help people not only live their lives, but also help those people who need jobs, right? It's going to pay the businesses to have the money and capital to pay the people that are working for them. It makes sense, right? It makes sense. As regards, certain other of Harris's policies, in terms of, wealth tax, I'm not sure how specifically that framework would work. I'm not sure whether I agree or disagree with it. I'm not opposed to, making sure that corporate loopholes in the tax system are closed. I don't, it's hard to sit here right now and explain the details of that. If anybody has taken a look at the tax code in the last, 50 years, it's reams of books upon books, and it's complicated. But there has to be some kind of will to actually make that happen. And I think that you need a leader and a person in the president, in the vice president, in Congress, in the Senate, in the House and the Senate, to at least come to some reason of mind that this is an issue that needs to be resolved. If you have people on one side saying, well, there's no problem, the corporate tax loops they're fine, nothing to see here, and then you have people on the other side saying, but they're robbing everybody. I don't think either of those positions is sound. There's always, in my experience in life, and I think other people would agree, just in life, it's never that one-sided. So I think there needs to be just a reasonable discussion had. And I think that discussion needs to be more transparent, because I also know that because these things get so complicated and so bogged down in the minutia, ordinary people don't understand what's happening. And so it's very easy for Trump or Harris or somebody to go out and say, but I'm going to do this. And people are like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. But then how are you going to do it? Yeah. Right? How are you going to make that happen? So something like a tax credit, people can easily understand what that is and how it might be effectuated. Something like closing tax loopholes, a little more complex, right? Corporate tax structure, corporate tax rate, those are all very complex things. But I think the conversation still needs to be had. And in a way that's civilized and in a way that actually is true to what's happening. And that people can understand.
To move a little forward across the aisle, like where it's not so partisan, one-sided, but where we can start, working across the aisle with one another for the best for Americans. So Trump's tax credit next year in 2025 comes to an end. James, what are your thoughts there? Because it's been said that he, gives tax breaks mostly to the rich and to corporations and fails to do that for everyday Americans who are in the middle class and poor bracket. That, what are your thoughts?
Well, a lot of that rhetoric is that class warfare nonsense. I don't think that's very productive. I personally do not support tax cuts. I don't want to raise the corporate tax cuts because I don't want to push corporations overseas. Remember many years ago they were going to Ireland and going offshore to avoid taxes. I don't want that to occur. I believe that we should raise the rates on individuals, especially those in the higher tax brackets. I'm willing to do that. However, it has to be matched with some very strong spending cuts. I know that's not popular.
So what cuts are you referring to, for example?
Across the board. Now, I'm no pacifist, but I think we're spending much too much on military. I think our military commitments are just too much for us. We're not the same country we were in 1945. One of the Trump proposals, and I like it very much, is to use as a bargaining chip our threats to NATO. Look, we will back up NATO, but we're not going to just bankroll them. We're not going to give them a blank check. We're spending much more as a percentage of our GNP as they are, and they're on the front lines. They're facing the Russians right there on the front lines. They're increasing. Now, part of that was a response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I believe that we can close some overseas bases. I think we could reduce our military somewhat. Social spending has to be cut. I know it's painful, but we're going to have to limit food stamps and I also believe that, and this is very unpopular with Republicans, I believe that we have to phase out farm subsidies. The sugar lobby, it is outrageous what they're getting away with. Tobacco. Here's an example. It's very interesting. We actually subsidize tobacco, and yet at the same time, the government also spends so much money trying to convince people not to smoke and to pay for all the medical expenses that are incurred. That's just a few specifics, but I say across the board cuts. And I believe if the American people understand why it has to be done, it's going to take leadership. And if they feel that the pain is spread evenly and fairly, I believe we can do it. I don't think we have an option. I mean, $35 trillion in our debt. We're spending over $2 billion a day in interest alone. And a lot of that interest is going to foreigners. So basically, we're exporting wealth. At the same time, we're importing poverty.
I just want to tack on to that. I think that's the key element of getting these types of policies approved and into effect is that it has to be that people feel cuts are affecting everyone equally. And I think up until now, the general sentiment has been that among, middle class Americans, that it's absolutely not fair, right? It's not fair that I have to spend 50 to 60% of my wages on housing, and then I have childcare. How do I even pay for childcare? I pay for childcare, and I think to myself, how do people who don't make my income pay for this? Or who don't have a partner that can help them, or stay home, or arrange this is insanity. How can a country expect to grow, expect to expand economically, socially, anything, in power and influence in the world, when we don't even understand the basic notion of childcare? And how, so I know this might get to another question that you're going to get to follow up on, but this is, to your point, it's so, the feeling, the sentiment that people are feeling is important, and I sometimes think it gets lost in the conversation, in the debates. What ordinary people actually have to sit down and deal with every day.
Thank you for watching the clip. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also stay tuned for more In the Can with Carmella Cann.